My name is Ken Riddick. I'm the publisher over at the Bee, and I want to welcome you to the first Bee Amplified Forum. It's a discussion on California water and its impact in the valley. Water issues in California have been complicated and often contentious. The drought has compounded those issues, often driving the stakeholders even further apart. Most of us can't even imagine a more pressing topic today. Tonight we hope that by amplifying a dignified conversation among some of the stakeholders, we might be able to bring a little clarity and understanding to all sides, but more importantly, to the residents of the region. In his 1859 essay on liberty, John Stuart Mill wrote, "Only through the collision of adverse opinion do we arrive at the entire truth." Tonight you'll hear the thoughts and informed opinions of some of the leading voices on California water. Bee readers, have provided more than 100 questions for the panel, and you can tweet your questions at the hashtag #OurWater. There won't be time to get to all of them tonight, but we'll follow up in the Bee and on modbee.com in the coming days. Additionally, we'd like to invite you to participate in the survey on some of the stands, the iPad stands out in the lobby. I want to take a minute just to say none of this would be possible if not for the support of our sponsors, in particular our title sponsor, the City of Modesto, so we're really grateful for the help. I'd also like to offer special thanks to the founder of the Great Valley Center and former Modesto Mayor Carol Whiteside for moderating the discussion this evening. She brings a wealth of experience and credibility to the task. We're proud to have her. So please welcome Carol to the stage, and let's get this started. Thank you all for coming.
So have a seat, everyone. The plan for this evening, let me kind of go through a little bit what we're going to do and how it's going to work. Every panelist will get the opportunity to have an opening statement, talk about their background, their issues, the things that they're working on, and so on. And then I'll have the opportunity, perhaps, to have a conversation with that person when they finish their opening statement, asking some questions or whatever we might need to clarify and expand on their background and expertise. Then I'm going to ask all of you, as a group, 3 questions in order to get the ball rolling. Some or all of you may respond to each question, but please don't feel you have to respond if it's not in your area of expertise. And around 8 o'clock, we'll give the panelists a short break while Joe Keita, publisher of the Bee, and Mike Dunbar, the editorial page editor, will provide a change of pace for us and have some fun with water insights and information. Then after the short interlude, whatever we're calling it, we'll get into the last segment. And this will be the balance of questions and discussion. We plan to adjourn around 9 o'clock. So a few words about our questions. The Bee received more than 150 questions from throughout the region. Obviously, we could not ask them all. So they've been grouped and in some cases consolidated in order to address as many of the issues as possible. We can't handle every question on every issue, but we'll do our best to cover a broad range of relevant topics. And it's my hope, panelists, to make this more of a conversation than a debate. If the conversation gets going, I'm going to drop out, and you all can talk to each other. And if there's no conversation, then I reserve the right to point the finger and bring you back in to the conversation. So that's the setup, and that's how we're going. And I'm going to start first with Jeff Cowan. So Jeff, you want to start? I'm sorry, I'm going to start with Randy. I have to do this in the right order or the mics won't work.
Carol, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many people here, and I want to also thank the Modesto Bee, the City of Modesto, for providing this forum. It seems everybody today is talking about water or not having enough water, but that hasn't always been the case. A public opinion poll that was conducted by the Field Poll Company asking in February of 2002, what are California's major issues? Of the 28, water rated 21st. But fast forward a dozen years, and a recent National Resources Defense Council poll found that California voters are more concerned about the drought than any other major issue. And in December of this last year, the Public Policy Institute of California polled Californians and found water supply concerns ranked first. And they found that a solid majority don't think that state and local governments are doing enough to respond to current drought. So it's good there's a few of us representing government here. I know that some of you don't think we're doing enough. I want to kudos to Modesto area residents. The state board just released the May conservation numbers, and Modesto reduced residential use by 35% this May compared to last May. The state average was 28.9, so way to go. It's an honor to be here. I served as a director of the Turlock Irrigation District. I have served at the state level in a voluntary capacity with the Farm Water Coalition and the Association of California Water Agencies. But now I serve in a full-time position as chairman of the Delta Stewardship Council. Let me see a show of hands. How many know what the Delta Stewardship Council is and does? Yeah, not very many. And I'm not sure. I think my 97-year-old mom is in the audience, and she frequently says, Randy, I know that what you do in Sacramento is really important, but how come I never see you on TV like Felicia Marcus and Assemblywoman Olsen? So I want to help facilitate our conversation tonight, let me briefly describe the Delta Stewardship Council and the work that we do. It was created in 2009 by the legislature. We're responsible for coordinating more than 200 local, state, and federal agencies who have the regulatory authority for water, ecosystem, and the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. It's composed of 7 members. 4 of us are appointed by the governor. One of my colleagues appointed by the governor is someone that you may know, retired federal court in Modesto native Judge Frank Damrell. The state law required the Delta Stewardship Council to develop and implement a comprehensive long-term management plan for the Delta. And that plan was adopted in May of 2013. The Delta plan that I have responsibility for overseeing includes 14 enforceable regulatory policies and 73 non-binding recommendations. We touch on things such as helping to carry out the state's policy to reduce reliance on the Delta for water supply, improve statewide water supply reliability, protect, restore, and enhance the Delta ecosystem, protect the Delta as the unique place that it is, improve water quality. Many of the decisions must be guided by best available science, and the list goes on. But it gives you a flavor for the breadth of the work that we do that goes well beyond the geographic Delta. This current 4-year drought has presented an incentive to seriously address some long-standing challenges by creating heightened public awareness about the deficiencies in our current water storage and delivery systems and the need to use water more efficiently. The media, and especially in this area, the Modesto Bee, has provided extensive coverage about our water supply and the drought response. Public interest has never been higher, and the governor, the legislature, and responsible agencies at every level of government are fully engaged. This all bodes well for success. It's good to have an opportunity to have this conversation tonight. You're going to hear from experts tonight, but we're also going to hear from you. And as the chair of a state agency, I welcome your input, and I believe I'll leave tonight with ideas about how I can better carry out my job as the chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. Unfortunately, the drought hasn't been equally distributed around the state. There are regions that have suffered greatly. Even within our region, the impact is varied. As I mentioned before, residential use has been forced to be reduced in 35% recently. Growers in the Turlock and Modesto Irrigation District service area have seen their deliveries cut by 60%. If you're on the west side or in the Merced Irrigation District, your allotment is at 0 or near 0. And if you're in the east side farming permanent crops, you're entirely dependent upon groundwater and a basin that's in serious overdraft and water levels are falling. Many regions in the state are worse shape. One bright spot from my perspective is that we have the resources in our region to improve water supply reliability and water quality if there is a willingness to invest in sustainable water quality and if there is a willingness to invest, and if leaders in the community and agencies can find ways to work together cooperatively. I want to highlight the work that the Turlock Irrigation District, the cities of Turlock, Ceres, and South Modesto recently have been reported to making serious progress towards reaching an historic water supply agreement. That's the kind of cooperation that we need. We're going to talk about a lot of issues tonight. We're going to talk about the need for more water storage, improved conveyance, improved ecosystem health in the Delta. And I look forward to engaging with my colleagues on a number of these issues. My final note is that I think this is an educational opportunity, and it's critical. Additionally, cooperation is very critical. In a speech to the water leaders gathered at Stanford University earlier this year, Governor Brown said it well: we must mobilize our capacity to cooperate. A year before, he was a little more emphatic. He said, I want to get, insert the word stuff, done. Don't we all?
Thanks, Randy. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm sure many of you know Jeff Cowan. Jeff is a local person who's been in the business community and in the water and power business for a long time. Jeff?
Thank you, Carol. I want to thank everybody for taking the time on a very hot evening. We're almost a full house tonight to come and to listen to us and to learn more about the water challenges. It is an honor and a privilege to have been asked to be a member of this distinguished panel of water experts, but I am not one of them. I bring a long history of community involvement at many levels: the local economy, business, healthcare, education, and water and power, from my 12-year tenure on the MID board in the 80s and 90s. My role tonight is to attempt to bring a community perspective to the water issue of the 21st century. From an economic viewpoint, the San Joaquin Valley, especially our three-county area, has not recovered from the Great Recession at the speed or with the robustness of our cities and counties to the west and along the coast. Long-standing issues about water, the environment, and political control between Northern and Southern California are now entangled with significant issues and challenges, including water between coastal and inland California. Among these issues we will discuss tonight are, of course, the impending restrictions on the use of our critical regional water resources. Those restrictions would have a severe economic impact on a region still struggling to fully recover from the Great Recession. One of the nation's most diverse and productive agricultural regions faces a potential disaster. After all, our economy is agriculture and agribusiness driven, but the Valley politically is and has been challenged to make its needs recognized, let alone dealt with. Agriculture needs to do a better job of making the case for its importance to not just the Valley, but the state and the rest of and the nation. Urban myths and media distortions about the use of water do a disservice to the agribusiness community. If it is true, and we're talking about this backstage, we don't quite know where this started, it might have been Rolling Stone, but if it is true that it takes 1 gallon of water to produce 1 almond, isn't it the ultimate consumer of that nut, say at a social event, that really is the ultimate consumer of that 1 gallon of water? There are other critical challenges facing the region's water supply. The FERC relicensing process underway for new Don Pedro Dam and Reservoir involving the MID, TID, and the city and county of San Francisco. The so-called peripheral tunnels project, both of which the relicensing, that initiative, and let alone the restrictions that are proposed, have ultimate strong calls for more water for environmental purposes and the opportunity for disastrous effects on our economy that is still struggling. Why do we always seem to wait to react to a crisis before we take action, especially as it relates to infrastructure improvements? Randy mentioned the need for more storage. The population of California has grown 65% since the last major water storage facility, New Melones Reservoir on the Stanislaus River, came online in 1979. There have been a few new projects, but they have not nearly been sufficient to provide for almost now 39 million people. I also have some concern that agriculture is not as well represented on state boards. The Water Resources Control Board has one member that has some farming background, but I look at the background of those members, there's a strong background in environment. That is important. But agriculture, as one of the major users of water, needs to be represented on some of these key boards. They need to be, their voices and views need to be valued, heard, and considered at this highest policy level. The Bee special section this past Sunday was an excellent syllabus, and if you haven't had a chance to read it, it is a phenomenal syllabus that should be in all of our schools. And hopefully the water challenges have been studied by all of you and our citizens. Last Saturday, I had a chance to get on the Stanislaus County Fair to see two of my younger grandchildren get their pigs ready for the swine show. As I looked, and if you haven't been to the fair, what a great event. I try to go every year. You look at all the young people involved in FFA and 4-H, and there are literally hundreds showing all kinds of animals. They are the future of California agriculture. They are the future of the valley. We owe them. We have a responsibility to make sure we provide the water resources for their future. Perhaps tonight we can come to a better understanding of these complex issues and even come to some consensus on some proposed courses of action to deal with our water crisis.
Thank you, Jeff. Assemblymember Olsen.
Thank you, Carol. Well, thank you all for coming here this evening, as both of the previous speakers have said. And as Randy said, it's so important because if we're going to get out of this water crisis for the long term, it's going to take all of us, the varying stakeholders from varying regions, working together to develop solutions and drive them forward. And you're all part of that tonight, so I do thank you for taking the time to be here. I also want to thank those of you who advocated for and voted for the water bond last fall. That passed overwhelmingly on the ballot because of the hard work of a lot of people from our community and across the state. And doing that was both a monumental step forward and a small step forward. I say it was monumental because we had been trying to get a water bond passed in this state for nearly 30 years. And so it's a big deal that we passed it with overwhelming support from the voters and overwhelming support from the legislature and the governor's administration as well. And it was the first critical step needed in order to build the water infrastructure that a state of 40 million people has to have in order to continue to grow economically and meet all of our varying water needs. I say it was a small step forward because shame on us if we now, in the post-era of passing the water bond, sit idly back and say, well, we passed a water bond, and then wait decades before we actually allocate those funds into projects, move them out of bureaucracy and into construction. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to keep the pressure up from the public, from the legislature, from all the parties involved to make sure that we're using the funds in that water bond to increase water supply. And, you know, let's be honest. I know there are many of us in the room, I count myself as one of them, who are pretty fed up that in the midst of this extreme drought, all we seem to be focusing on at the state are cutbacks and conservation measures. We're not doing anything else. And while that is so important and why we should absolutely applaud the fact that Modesto is leading once again by having 35% conservation, that is something to applaud. We will not conserve our way out of this drought. We have to do more. And so while the state simply focuses on conserving and cutbacks, in the meantime, we have fallowed nearly 500,000 acres of land. We have put nearly 20,000 farm workers out of work. We have tripled food bank lines in many areas of our state. We have entire communities, I think of the city of Porterville, entire communities who don't even have drinking water. We delivered bottles of water down to Porterville last week because they don't have drinking water. We have domestic wells, even in our own community, that are running dry. Our lawns are dying. Now we have threats from the state to take more water out of our rivers, the surface water that we rely on here in this community. We have more and more bureaucratic hurdles and delays when it comes to moving desalination projects, storage projects, water recycling projects forward. We're now doubling down on a tunnels project that will cost taxpayers billions of dollars without delivering a single additional drop of water. I mean, what are we doing? It is... it's really past time for all of us to work together to bring in all the stakeholders, the urban users, the agricultural users, the environmental purposes, large, small, urban, rural, suburban communities, and work together to develop creative solutions to increase supply. The only way we are going to get out of this drought in the short term and the long term is to increase water supply. And so my goal is to help provide statewide leadership, and I'm blessed to have the role as Assembly Republican leader this year that can help get me into communities north, state, east, and west of us, because we need leaders who are going to bring our varying regions together. We can't continue to pit regions against one another and expect to have comprehensive water solutions that will help all parts of our state. And we have to do this on historically challenging issues, from conveyance to storage, groundwater, habitat, governance, regulation. There are a myriad of issues, complex issues when it comes to water that we have to address together. And as Peter Drucker once said, he said, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic." And we cannot continue to double down on yesterday's logic, the failed policies that have gotten us in this situation in the first place. We have to start thinking about our future. And so it's crucial that we work together on short-term solutions that can get us out of our current drought crisis, and then on innovative long-term solutions that can better prepare us when the next drought inevitably comes. And I don't mean to trivialize the situation. This is not an easy task. You know, people like Randy Fiorini at the Delta Stewardship Council, Felicia Marcus leading the State Water Board, they have a tremendously difficult task to balance our water needs while prioritizing historic water rights. But it's a task that we have to do. And as I've said, we cannot just conserve our way out of the drought. It is impossible. No amount of conservation is going to solve this problem. We must expedite water projects that are going to increase supply, move them out of bureaucracy and into construction in a reasonable and quick time frame. We also have to encourage and support more local reliance. The city of San Diego in the early 90s got less than 10% of its water from local supplies. Today, they've done such a good job that over 40% and growing amount of its water resources are developed locally. It can be done. And we need to encourage that trend line to continue in San Diego and other parts of the state so that we can all work together and so there's less reliance on the Delta. The Delta will always be a critical part of our statewide water supply, and we absolutely have to restore the Delta. But there's also so much we can do to increase local supplies, especially through desalination, where we see the costs getting lower and the technologies improving to make them more feasible. And so in closing, I just want to say I am committed to working across the aisle, to working with all parties, all stakeholders, to truly develop solutions that will help us in the short term and the long term. But what I want to see, and what I want to see from all of us demanding, is that we have to stop talking and we have to start acting. So thank you for being here tonight, because together we can get this done.
Okay, Sarge Green, who is somebody who's worked on our groundwater quite a bit in this area and done some other projects. Sarge, it's all yours.
Thank you. Well, I've been giving the water industry my attention for over 42 years. I think we finally have your attention. Attention is good, but we need to sustain it, because even though we are facing some very dire circumstances in the short term, we have to be in it for the long haul. So I'm committed to that type of a path. I think we have some people who are complaining right now, but my experience recently has been that I've had more people talk to me about asking what they can do. So we need to capture that and get it to put it to work, whether it's industry, Silicon Valley, investment, whatever the sources and activities that can help us to manage this thing and turn it around and get it where it needs to go. We have to accept all of that input. As mentioned, my area has been groundwater, and groundwater has been the source of water that's helped bridge the droughts and shortages ever since the turn of the 19th century to the 20th century, when the deep well turbine pump came into practical use. Byron Jackson delivered a very effective pump that we can withdraw water from the underground. The current drought unquestionably has been very hard on groundwater overall, but I think in my experience in working up and down the valley, the impact on rural residents has been much greater than the cities, or for that matter, for irrigated agriculture. Agriculture, in fact, has pumped a majority of the groundwater in this drought, but agriculture, in my view, is also a significant part of the solution. And here's where I'm more of an optimist and believe that we have to start doing things now that can help ourselves in the future. Because here's one of the science things, and I'm definitely a science geek, but I try to bridge the gap between science and policy and information and outreach and communications. Agriculture still covers the land that are the best portals to get water into the ground. And that is one of the techniques that we're going to have to use here in the very near future if we're going to improve groundwater. If you stop and think what's happened, agriculture has become very efficient, including installing a lot of precision irrigation, mostly because not only did it save water, but it produced better crops in many locations. Having said that, what they alternately did not do is flood the ground in the places where it can improve groundwater and therefore get the water back in the ground. So we've kind of hurt ourselves, shot ourselves in the foot. So now we have to actually go out and recruit people to be able to find them that 10% or so, 15% maybe, of the land that are the main areas that we can get water back into the ground. And what we really need to do is get people who use groundwater but cannot recharge the groundwater for whatever reasons, the soils and the geology are not adequate to do that. They have to participate in helping the land operators who can on their behalf. That's what the new law we have really is about. I know a lot of people are concerned about groundwater regulation, but really it's about locals figuring out a way to work together and get the job done and get working on solutions before we have to go back and talk about putting a lock on somebody's pump. I think the biggest expense that we're all going to see, in my view, in terms of trying to manage groundwater better and help everybody, whether it's a shallow well in a rural area or agriculture or cities, is we have to get better connected. And by that, I mean not only physically, but mentally we have to get better connected. We have to connect pipes and pumps and canals and everything better to be able to move water around more efficiently, to get it into the ground in those special places that will help. But the mental connectivity is what I first talked about, is we have to maintain this current attitude that we have about we have a problem and we need to work on it. And we also need to look at how we are wired institutionally. Do we have all the right pieces and parts in government and the private side? Do we have everything in place that's going to make this thing work for all of us in the future? It took quite a bit of time for us to get into this groundwater predicament, and as a scientist, I will tell you it's going to take some time for us to get out of it as well, and I stand ready to assist. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarge.
I particularly appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this conversation and a moment in California history that actually calls on us to do just this, to come together for conversations, to deal with an unprecedented collective challenge that's greater than any that we've experienced in our lifetimes, our parents' lifetimes, or their parents' lifetimes. The complete drought over multiple years combined with heat and temperatures that take away our snowpack. These are also the kinds of things that we're told we'll get more of in climate change as the temperatures rise and more precipitation falls as rain rather than snow. So there's no time like the present to figure out how to deal with it, and the best way to deal with it is to deal with it together. We also know our population will grow and that we have to learn to be more effective, more efficient, and more thoughtful about our water system. I agree with the speakers who say that we're late in taking action. I have to say, from having worked in the water world, private sector, environmental sector, governmental sector, including running a local agency, a public works department, which is really where the rubber hits the road, I have to say, potholes and garbage and wastewater and the like, that we have to just get together and deal with it in a way that requires us to reach across aisles, to talk with each other rather than at each other, and to listen to each other. Our system, though, that we have is a highly complex system. I'm probably the most complex one on the planet as I look at it, and I look at the other states in the country, particularly in the West. We have a highly complex system of water rights that I agree are important to implement and enforce. We have a complex infrastructure that has led in the last century to a miracle of economic growth and of food and fiber growth that I think we should all respect and be amazed at. And I spent a lot of time in urban California where folks can take for granted where their water comes from, but also where their food comes from. I feel like my job is to try and connect those different worlds. It's an incredible miracle that also has led to considerable impact on the natural world, and we're struggling with how to rectify that somewhat while also recognizing the food, the fiber, the people, and the reliance on that water. It's like figuring out how to rebuild a car going 70 miles an hour. It is a challenge at the best of times, and even more challenging in challenging times. And that is really hard to do in a soundbite world. But if we focus on solutions and getting things done, I think we can make it work, and I think we're making progress. About a year and a half ago, this is before the drought was declared, the administration came together with I hate this name because it sounds so boring, a California Water Action Plan. And it was less of a plan than a statement of priorities of the administration for the next 5 years. We were looking optimistically. It was about a year and a half ago. And the Water Action Plan basically was saying, we need to get into action as opposed to talking past each other. And frankly, rather than arguing about what one solution or another is going to be the answer, in the face of what we see coming at us in 20 years, in 30 years, 40 years, whenever climate change hits, knowing that our population is going to grow, we need to get into action, and we need to do all of the above. We need to do all of it, and we can. And so the Water Action Plan doesn't say conservation over everything or storage over everything. It says we have to do it all. Conservation, recycling, stormwater capture, treatment and storage, which many Southern California communities are starting to do. We need to deal with desal in the appropriate cases. We need to do storage above ground, below ground, big and small, wherever we can find it. That loss of snowpack is something that scares me and keeps me up at night. And so we need to find storage everywhere we can, because the rain in California doesn't fall where most of it is used at the time it's used, and it falls irregularly, more irregularly than any other state in the nation. We have bigger hydraulic swings, which says that storage is critically important. Our groundwater basins are the largest thing out there that can even approximate the loss of snowpack, and so groundwater management became a very important priority for all of us, and the groundwater management bill passed last year, happily, with agreement from across the board in the administration and out in the field that it should be best done locally rather than a top-down state program. And coming out of local government, I felt very strongly that that was the right answer, because at heart it's about managing a community resource at the community level. And so we have it there in times of drought. And this year, thank God for groundwater basins, because the numbers that Assemblywoman Olsen talked about would be 10 times as bad, or 5 to 10 times as bad, according to UC Davis, if folks didn't have groundwater to rely on. So thank goodness for groundwater. But we talked about more as well. We talked about doing ecosystem restoration ahead of the curve in creative ways with people, as opposed to waiting for the endangered species law to have to be invoked, be able to use more creative measures, which many people have done in other parts of the state, and some right around here where you have farmers working to come up with ways that are good for birds and fish, and we need to be rewarding that. We talked about infrastructure fixes of all sorts, dealing with the Delta just being one of them. There are interties breaking out all over the state in a way that's terrific as communities reach out to figure out how to use their groundwater basins and their storages together as a system. It's happening in the Bay Area in a way I could never make happen in the 90s when I was at EPA. It's happening in Southern California. It's happening in the Sac Valley, all over the place, which is, and in the Central Valley, which is terrific. And we also put safe drinking water on deck. The first time I'd seen an administration acknowledge that that is the issue of our time, that we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Californians who can't count what comes out the tap. And in 2014 and 2015, that seems unimaginable, and we need to try and do something about it. That all of the above approach, I think, led to the agreement for a bond, because the governor said he wouldn't support a bond unless it had a strategy behind it, as opposed to just being the usual assortment of earmarks to get votes. And people really rose to the occasion. Nearly unanimous vote in the legislature to put it on the ballot, and overwhelming passage by the voters, which says to me the voters want to get something done, and they could see themselves in it. No matter what end of the spectrum you were in, you could see yourself in that bond and see the value of it. And I think that's the attitude we need, and the attitude we need to have to get as much done as we possibly can, as intelligently as we can, so we can go back and do more. And I think every part of it is going to need to be implemented. We have to overcome the traditional divisions, the is, so, is not level of discourse that can characterize the water world, and really listen to each other. Look at people across the table and say, what do you need? How can we all get better together? We are all in this together, not just in the drought, but for the long run. The Water Board is a place that really looks for, quite apart from what you may have seen or heard, looks for solutions that try to maximize the benefit for all users. It's the heart of what we do, is to look at all, for example, in our water quality setting, what are all the beneficial uses of a water body, and how do we find that sweet spot where we can maximize everyone's, as opposed to saying, oh, we're going to toss these uses over the transom and forget about them. We can't do that. Our job is to be that meeting place that tries to find the balance for everyone. I won't go into all the things we do, but for those of you who may not know, we have a number of divisions which actually do end up hitting on all cylinders in a drought, which is why we may have been a little more visible during this drought than we have been previously. We implement the water rights system, a very complex one, and there have been a lot of decisions that have had to be made by our executive director and then ultimately are appealed to us about making adjustments, because in the drought, the rules that might have made sense in a wet, a dry, a wet, a normal, a dry, even a critically dry year just don't make sense anymore, because we don't want to be emptying out all of our reservoirs to deal with flows that made sense at the time in the spring and then have none left over to either repel salinity, help fish later in the year, or for export. And so a very challenging place to be. We also implement the system of curtailments, which is very complex, both procedurally and in practice. We have the drinking water program now. The legislature moved it over to us about a year ago to help get more safe drinking water to poor communities. We regulate those communities over 15. We don't have the authority over the smaller than 15 or the individual domestic wells. But during the drought, we've been working with OES, the Office of Emergency Services, and the Department of Water Resources, not only to deal with those systems over 15 or the others, and we are delivering water to people in bottles, in tankers. We're drilling wells, and we're running pipe. And in all that work, there are drought angels out there helping each other and other communities. We have water quality, where we have been trying to expand supply. Conservation is something that we got special authority to implement, and it's gotten the lion's share of the news. And that piece is about having our large urban areas able to withstand yet another year of drought or another year and to preserve whatever their local supplies are, because we're not going to be able to deliver bottles and tankers of water to our larger urban communities. And conservation now is going to really pay off if we have another dry year. We've also been adding resources for recycled water, which is probably the next level of supply augmentation. And we've put out low-cost financing. We're going to have bond dollars to deal with. We've also been streamlining the process for being able to do groundwater recharge and irrigation and other outdoor uses. And a host of other things, setting desal standards, sort of basic standards, level playing field to put desal in its appropriate place to be able to compete with that, and to work on stormwater capture, particularly in our larger cities, in a way that encourages multiple benefits, not just cleaning it up in a way that prevents pollution, but which gets it into the ground for water supply, creates green space in park poor communities, and also enhances flood control. And so a host of those things. that we're doing. In all of them, it really does require people talking to each other, and we do provide a forum for that. I've frequently said that the biggest challenge we face in any environmental world, but in particularly in the water world, is not a challenge of engineering, technology, law, or finance. It's the challenge of ecosystem management, which doesn't mean managing big egos, frankly, although some people immediately have people that come to mind when you say that. It's about actually seeing the people across the table and seeing the people in front of you and trying to find ways to bridge divides, as opposed to just being in parallel, spouting our needs. It requires being a little bit self-aware, but mostly it requires listening to people and trying to help come up with solutions that meet multiple people's needs. And I have to say, as much as a crisis can bring out the best and the worst in people, I've been inspired by the level at which people from very diverse backgrounds have, and maybe even behind headlines where they're quoted in harsh ways, actually sitting down and trying to figure out how they can either help poor communities get drinking water, how they can help a fish, how they can build a stronger community. And so people have stepped up in ways that give me hope that if we keep that momentum going, even if it does rain, and we hope it does this fall, that we'll actually put California on the map and retool ourselves both in a human sense and an infrastructure sense to be able to meet the challenges of the 21st century. So look forward to the conversation and really appreciate the Bee giving us this opportunity to chat with you all.
Thank you, Felicia. Okay, so a few warm-up questions, just a few little teasers here. This probably is for Jeff and Kristin to start, but again, we want Randy and Sarge and Felicia to join in. And the question really is because of all the economic dislocation, which you have both mentioned in your comments, because of the lack of water and curtailed business activities and so on, do you think that if we have to designate more water for the environment, for fish flows in the future, that it will create greater economic dislocation, or is there a way to minimize that?
He's first.
Yeah, right.
It absolutely will. I mean, there is no doubt that if we continue to increase water for environmental purposes, it will contribute to further economic devastation and dislocation. And that's not to say that water for environmental purposes isn't important. It most certainly is. And we can meet the needs of the environmental purposes and our economic purposes by increasing supply. But for now, it's a zero-sum game. And I have grave concern that the priority has been placed on fish over people. And, you know, several years ago,
You all, I have to say, I know that you're going to agree and disagree with people, but it's going to take us a lot longer if we applaud. So can we just ask you to hold your applause and let people make their statements? Go ahead, Kristin.
And several years ago, we as a state determined that we would have co-equal goals. You know, co-equal goals for the environment and for the economy. But I have been very concerned at the evidence I've been seeing over the past year or two that the decisions being made are certainly favoring the environment over the economy. And that is of concern to me because, as I stated earlier, people are being put out of work, people can't put food on the table for their families. Water is important to our statewide economy. It takes, you know, a gallon of water to produce an almond, yes, but it also takes 8 gallons of water to produce one single computer chip. It takes multiple gallons of water to make fashion jeans that everybody in Southern California wears. And so this is a statewide problem that merits statewide solutions. And if we care about our current and future economy, we have to find better balance, and we have to stop prioritizing the environment over the economy.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Randy or Felicia. I'm going to let you off the hook for a second,
Okay.
Jeff, and ask Randy or Felicia, who are on the regulation side of this. Is the environment being favored over other uses for the water?
Well, the Delta Stewardship Council is sort of the keeper of the co-equal goals, and it's our job, after having adopted the Delta Plan, to make sure that water needs for California and the environment move forward together at a common pace. There's a lot of focus at the Water Board now on resetting water flow standards, water quality control standards. But within the purview of the Water Board, they also have the ability to address other stressors in the system, and that often gets lost. We know in the Tuolumne River that striped bass and other introduced species are eating most of the out-migrating fry and smolt.
Right.
That needs to be addressed. We know that there are several large wastewater treatment plants that are disposing of ammonium in the water that's impacting the food supply for the fish. That needs to be addressed. The Stockton Deepwater Ship Channel has a problem with low dissolved oxygen. Years ago, we addressed that not with more flows, but with aeration, and essentially have solved that problem without one more drop of water. So we need to be more creative and find ways to address the stresses that are on the ecosystem and use more than just simply additional water flows in stream to manage this problem.
Yeah, I would just say both are true. I mean, it's a very painful place to be, sitting, listening to not just scientists, but advocates on all sides. I mean, the fact of the matter is, folks make a pretty good case, and the science suggests that there's not anywhere near enough water going to fish. But again, the impact of that on the economy would be devastating. And so we haven't come anywhere near where much of the science says we ought to be. I agree with Randy on the fact that there are multiple stressors. You know, to say that fish don't need water doesn't make a lot of sense, but water plays a role in all of those stressors. And we've tried to be open, although we haven't always explained ourselves as well as you might, which is a piece of why we've pulled our recent proposals back, because everybody misunderstood them and read them in the worst light possible, because people, of course, hear what they expect to hear, and we didn't explain ourselves anywhere near as well as we needed to. But we frequently will put out things and then invite people to come in and give us a better solution, particularly one that may not take as much water but will yield benefit to the fish. And there actually are people who are working on those solutions, and we have a way to accept that and to encourage people to come together to do all those things, whether it's habitat and the like that fish need. I mean, huge deal on the ammonium was the decision we made on the Sacramento Regional Treatment Plant, and we just gave them a loan of over $1 billion to help them upgrade that facility. That was very important, because fish need water, but they need oxygen, they need to be free of pollutants, they need to be have at least a fighting chance against predators. So figuring out how to deal with predators is really very important as well. And so it's really quite the challenge as we figure out how do we balance. But today I just read another series of papers about how we've completely thrown out fish standards in the midst of the drought, and largely have cut back tremendously, other than for salinity control. And yet the meme sounds as if we've been hurling water at fish, which we have not. Fish are the ones that get hurt worst in a drought if you look at the stats, and it's just a challenge. There's just not enough water. The thing that's missing sometimes in the dialogue is that we are in the worst drought of the century, and so everybody's getting hurt. Fish don't have the alternative of going to groundwater. And so the whole thing is just very painful and almost impossible to navigate, but we have to do it as best we can.
Jeff?
Carol, I just a quick comment to following up. I concur with Kristin's comments, and all the other comments are certainly important. But a little historical perspective on the Tuolumne River for a moment. The MID and TID and the city and county of San Francisco, a lot of people forget that they're partners on the river. The Hetch Hetchy system, I think 2.5 million people in the Bay Area get their water from the Tuolumne River and the Hetch Hetchy system. I'm not sure they all know that. In fact, probably most of them don't. But the districts have been very good stewards environmentally over the years. They, in fact, employ a full-time aquatic biologist. Randy remembers that from the years he was on the TID board. Millions and millions of dollars have been spent over the last 50 years for environmental studies on the river from all points of view of quality, flows, fisheries, etc. Everybody wants to have a healthy fishery. Everybody wants clean and safe water. It has been said that the Tuolumne River is the most studied river in the United States. The FERC relicensing, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission relicensing process that's been underway for over 5 years for the new Don Pedro Dam and Reservoir is forecast to cost the districts and ultimately all you ratepayers $20 million. So there's an economic effect and cost to all of us that's reflected in water and electric rates by all of the environmental challenges that we have on these rivers.
So, you know, it's going to be really hard. I could pick up any one of these strings and go on. So we're going to jump around a little bit. Sarge, you want to say something?
Yeah,
sure.
I want to add something here because this is both science and personal to me. On the science side, I understand the need to have healthy watersheds, which includes the entire scope of a watershed, whether it's people, terrestrial resources, the forests or whatever, as well as the fisheries. Because if you don't have healthy systems, they won't give you all the things that you want out of them, including a water supply. But I was, as you note up on there, the general manager of Tranquility Irrigation District. And in 1991, after I'd been there a couple of years, and by the way, I did a little research on that area before I became general manager. And up to the 1980s, Tranquility had the second highest median income in Fresno County, only exceeded by an area known in Fresno as Fig Garden. And it was because that the farmers that still lived in Tranquility were some of the pioneer families that started out in the eastern part of Westland's Water District. But in 1991, the federal government passed something called the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, emphasis on the alleged improvement. And what happened was, I happened to be then in a district that had very good water rights to both the Kings River and the San Joaquin River. So the farmers who were pretty much ensconced right in Tranquility were okay, but a lot of them were these pioneer families that had a lot of ground out in Westlands. And the federal government came in and said, this is the bad ground and we want to retire it. And they did. Right now you drive between Mendota and Tranquility and there's about 75,000 acres of land that's empty. What I saw happen in that community was what really gets me. It went from one of the highest median income areas to one of the lowest. And the farmers actually, most of them came out pretty good because they had to give them fair market value for the land that they gave up, shut down. But the hardware store, we had 2 groceries, we ended up with 1. The fertilizer dealer, the aerial applicator, all of their business dropped dramatically. And all of a sudden I saw the town go to the bottom. The housing stock went crazy. It just all became dilapidated. A lot of the middle managers and salaried workers that used to then get paid off of the land that was out in Westlands, they were all gone. What I'm trying to point out is that we have this system here where we try to do the best that we can, and we have to adjust and move things around. But the thing that we've been the worst at doing is understanding those third-party impacts. We've never figured out how to deal with those people who have lost their jobs and gone away, and we don't know what happened to them. So if we come out with anything, if that was something that we came out with, a way that we could figure out if we have to go through some heartbreaking process of reallocation anywhere, how do we deal with the third-party impacts? We've never done it well. We destroyed the Inyo and Mono County valleys and ended up with a major lawsuit that ended up trying to restore that environment. Every time we've done these massive reallocations of water, somebody has been hurt locally, and I think we need to do a better job to stop that.
So Sarge, it's interesting that you mentioned that because one of the readers asked a question, and at this point it may be a rhetorical question, but the question was, what's being done to help the businesses who are second and third, you know, kind of multiplier businesses? The urban water cuts affect landscapers, nursery owners, people who repair lawnmowers, all those sorts of things. Is anybody reaching out or thinking about or looking at what those third-party or fourth or fifth-party impacts might be?
I think we have economists that could calculate it, but we've never figured out what to do about it. I don't know. Does anybody else know? I don't know.
I think that urban, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, the landscaping industry and others were supportive of what we were doing because people still do need their lawns cared for and the change out for people who can change out. I do think that there's always an impact and we need to figure out how to think about it. I mean, it's just as I will talk about the need to protect fish and give them a little bit more back of what they really need. When I talk with the environmental community, I also say, but you have to acknowledge that the changes in implementing the environmental laws put a challenge on communities and agriculture. We need to be sensitive to that and figure out how to talk through transitions and respect each other rather than pointing fingers at each other, because we really are all in this together.
And whoever said ag needs a place at the table, those businesses also need a place at the table because they are less organized perhaps and less well recognized. Okay, one more question before we do our little interlude here. And this is a question of preference. You may give us a preference fast or quick, or you may explain what your feelings are. Would it be better to spend $6 billion, which I think is some of that bond money, on new dams that won't be built for 20 or 30 years in spite of the efforts of some people to expedite them, or to start now and increase the capacity of existing reservoirs by raising existing dams? Any comments, questions, yes or no, preference?
I'd say both. We have to do both. I think, and then we have to bring 20, 30 years down to a much sooner time frame.
But we also have to do small ones everywhere, and that's starting to break out all over. If you think about the last major reservoir that was built, wasn't a zillion years ago, it was Diamond Valley in Southern California, where Southern California, after the last drought, spent $3.5 billion of their own money, and that's why there wasn't an outcry about the drought last year where it was everywhere else. That was brilliant money, brilliantly spent in local, regional storage.
I talk about, there's actually three things. There's big S, which is the dams, and there's little s. There's a lot of things that we can do locally. And that land I mentioned in Westlands, it should be in ponds. And when we have a wet year, it should be stacked up in there and find a home for it, whether it's direct irrigation or pipe someplace for groundwater recharge. So there are places that we have that we can do little less. And then there's R. R is called retention. There's a lot of landscapes that if we did a little better job of holding on to, applying more material like mulch or whatever, there's a lot of little R's that both ag and industry and urban can all do to help with a retention landscape that does a better job of managing water.
So as sort of an aside, quick question, there is a proliferation of artificial turf going into front yards in a lot of places. Does that not limit the potential for recharge?
Absolutely. I'm not a big fan, I'm sorry.
Okay. Randy, you had a comment on that.
There are two drivers for storage. Number one, the large systems, the Central Valley Project, the State Water Project, have to be reoperated. They were designed to take water in dry years and supplement local supplies along the coast and in Southern California. With the knowledge that we have of the environment, we have to turn that system upside down. We need to be able to capture more water in wet years and then have it available to release in dry years for both human and fish needs. So the number one driver for the storage, or the number one demand for the storage money is going to be finding locations above and below the delta to store water in wet years. The second driver is the groundwater regulation that was passed. And we are going to have to find in every region of the state areas that are suitable for storing off-stream storage or capturing flood flows that previously hadn't been captured, and then percolate that water back into the groundwater to resupply the groundwater. So
hold that thought, because we're going to talk a lot about groundwater and the new groundwater legislation after we have our interlude. So we're going to give the panel a few minutes to get a drink of water and have a break. We have the new duo of interlude entertainers, Mike Dunbar and Joe Kita, with some information and some fun for you during our 10-minute break. So, panel.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're finding tonight's discussion enlightening. My name is Joe Kita. I'm the editor of The Bee. And before our panelists come back out, we're going to take a few minutes to talk to you about an experience we've all, unfortunately, been sharing over the past few years, and that's the drought.
And I'm Mike Dunbar. I'm the opinions page editor of The Bee, and part of my job is selecting the editorial cartoons each day. Some of you like them, some of you don't. I hear about it. But I hope you're enjoying the ones we're putting up on the screen behind us tonight. Jon Stewart couldn't be here. So you can call Joe and me the comic relief, or at least for tonight.
Have you noticed it's so dry?
How dry is it, Joe?
It's so dry, the city police have announced a water pistol buyback plan, but only if they're full.
It's so dry, Joe. The longest lines at the county fair this year are for the water fountains and not the beer booth.
It's so dry, Mike, that this year's Hollywood blockbuster will be The Thirsty Games, directed by John Waters. Actually, I've heard they're going to reboot Kevin Costner's Waterworld. No, really, they should call it Belly Flop.
It's so dry that our valley's top 3 products soon will be cactus, concrete, and dust mops.
Well, Mike, it's so dry that cows are giving evaporated milk.
Okay, that was the last one of the dry jokes.
They were pretty bad, so.
Well, I hope you're relieved that that was over. Does anyone here know how many gallons of water the typical California family uses in a day? Any guesses? 200, that's a good guess. A little low. 300 what? That's pretty darn close, actually. That's right on it. That's before the drought. Nowadays, it's actually, with the reductions, it's down to about 270. And we still, though, with 40 million of us, there's an awful lot of water that we need to find. And it takes a lot of plumbing to move all that water around, which is why we have the world's most complicated system. So, excuse me for fumbling with my papers here.
So besides having enough water to keep all of those people healthy, we also have to supply water to nearly 10 million acres of farmland. In all, our state manages 43 million acre-feet of water a year. Agriculture uses a lot of water, but so does everything else we do. The water bottles you all have in your goodie bags here tonight, it took more than twice as much water to make the bottle as it did to fill it.
So, which one of these items up on the screen here takes the most water to make? T-shirt, absolutely right. And it's not even wet. Okay, there you go. We get a good look at it.
There you go.
In fact, it takes more than 10 times more water to make that T-shirt than the other products in this picture. But I have to ask, don't you think everyone would rather have, I don't know, 10, 15 glasses of Valley Red than a T-shirt?
This drought has really been filled with hardship for many of us, but we shouldn't just look at the downside. So here are the top 10 reasons for enjoying the drought. Number 10, yes, it makes fishing easier.
I did expect some groans with that one, didn't you?
Yes, I did too.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Okay, number 9. Well, that's good. I just turned it off. Well, good for me.
Oh, there you
go. There we go. Thank you. Number 9 is we're all dry wine drinkers now.
Number 8, no one nags us about not cutting our lawns. That's actually Mike's lawn on the screen, or I think it is.
Well, it's going to be up there eventually.
Blank.
There it is.
Yeah. Mine actually looks a lot worse than that, so.
Yeah, sort of that green shaming they're talking about,
yeah,
I guess.
It's pretty crunchy right now.
Yes. And number 7, and this is one of my favorite Jack Oman cartoons. He's a Sacramento Bee cartoonist, but I have to ask, who really wants to shower with Governor Brown? Show of hands?
Number 6. This one actually was suggested by our publisher.
Is he laughing, Joe? Can you tell?
I don't know where he is, but I hope he is. Otherwise, we're not going to have a job tomorrow.
Yeah, well, that could be it. And so, number 5, You've all heard of, or maybe you've all heard, Orange is the New Black. It's a very popular television show. Well, we've got a twist on that. Yeah, brown is the new green.
Number 4. The city has a new Cash for Grass program, and it doesn't involve any undercover officers. At least not yet, but if some of you out there keep watering your lawns 4 days a week, there might be handcuffs in your future.
Okay. Now, you've all heard of the color-coded drought classification system, and here's some easy ways to remember it. Blue is for shorter showers. Yellow is for flushing less often. Brown is the color of our lawns. And finally, the third thing for making the drought a little less painful is we have a new level. It's called red, and it's also called the fire department.
Okay, number 2. The drought gives Hollywood new angles for television shows. Try to recall The Pitch by William Shatner. The last big pitch he made was suggesting a pipeline be built from Canada to California.
And the number one reason for appreciating the drought,
it could make us a new tourist destination, like the old movie, The River of No Return. But if our rivers don't return, neither will the almonds, the peaches, the walnuts, melons, tomatoes, milk, and really so much more.
And I did it again, I think. There we go. We hope everyone realizes from what we're all hearing tonight that even if it starts raining again, we're going to need to solve our water problems. And at the Bee, we are committed to being part of this conversation and keeping it going. Send us your letters, send us your emails, call us if you don't have email, and ask the questions you want answered. If we can't answer them, then we'll ask the folks who are up here tonight to help us. And if you have a burning question right now, and you have a smartphone, you can send it to us. You can tweet it at #OurWater.
Well, now you've seen the comic relief we've had for tonight. I'm sorry we're not Jimmy Fallon and Jay Leno up here.
But we're better looking, Joe.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. But
All
the
right.
jokes are pretty bad, but it's time now for the serious folks to return to the stage. We really have a great panel here today with incredible background and information and a lot of work that they've put into their presentations here today. So let's continue our conversation about water.
Thank you.
Well, thanks to our interlude. That's a new profession for the writers of the Bee, for sure. Yeah. Okay, I said to Randy we're going to talk a little bit about groundwater, and in fact we are. But again, let's set the scene a little bit. This is a question for anybody. If we think about the two alternate futures for this region in the short term, one is certainly a continued drought, and the other is torrential rains. And there certainly are predictions of another El Nino and so on. What do these alternatives mean for the region?
Devastation either way. I'll tell you, I was at a conference this weekend, and we talked a little bit about the fact that many, many scientists are predicting an El Nino year this next year, which could lead to devastating flooding in the state of California. And not to continue down the train of frustration, but in the drought relief package that we passed in the legislature this year, we reallocated funds for flood protection that were available back in 2006 and never spent. So previously, after years of extreme flooding, money was allocated by the state so that we could be better prepared for the next time that floods come around. The money was available, it was never allocated, the projects were never done, and so now we have the potential of facing extreme flooding again, and we're no better prepared than we were the last time. And on the flip side, as it relates to drought and the need to increase water supply through storage, desalination, groundwater recharge, you know, the projects go on, I fear that we'll have the same result. You know, we finally have the seed money available in the water bond to get these projects out of bureaucracy and into construction and off the ground. And again, as I said earlier, shame on us if we don't do it before the next drought comes. And so it's this back and forth, which is typical throughout history of times of drought, times of flooding, and we have to work together as a state to make sure we're better prepared for both in the future.
Okay, I think that covers it. So let's talk a little bit about groundwater, because that's sort of where we left off. And many people think, and Felicia said, it's been our salvation this last year as the surface waters and the rivers and so on have been dry and unavailable. The state is insisting that we regulate groundwater. The farmers are being forced to use it more and more. People who live in the country are running low on it. Wells are going dry. And there are others who want to sell it to the highest bidder. How do we protect water and sustain it for future use, especially in this region?
Farmers facing any harm, they can't plant as many trees as they had alfalfa, but they end up being held steady on their economic front. So that's one way that communities have managed to do it. In other cases, folks pay each other to use their water, and that works too. But it's at a community level where you can see the other people in the basin, and you've all worked it out. Hopefully it won't take decades for folks to figure it out.
Jeff?
Carol, I think another little historical perspective on the value of groundwater management on a positive way. Back in the late 80s, the City of Modesto, or even actually earlier than that, with its extensive groundwater and well system, was having serious problems with overdrafting and water quality issues. So negotiations started between MID and the City of Modesto to develop a joint water treatment plant. Those negotiations went on for a long time. I was co-chair of the committee for the MID, and we finally got it put together, and that plant came online 20 years ago. In this ensuing 20 years, the underground water table within the district's boundaries and the City of Modesto has increased 40 feet because of the use of surface water. And a great percentage of the water, surface water from that treatment plant is used for the City of Modesto today. Interesting studies were done in that time period, and this addresses what Sarge had mentioned earlier and even Randy had mentioned, is that where did that underground water table come from? About 50%, and I think the number was even greater in the studies in the 80s, got there because of long-term flood irrigation. So, yes, drip and efficient irrigation systems are important, but we need that groundwater recharge. And the City of Modesto and MID water treatment plant is a perfect example of a success story of that.
So, go ahead, Kristin, go ahead.
Groundwater, if that's all right. On top of groundwater, one of the things that's really important to note is the situation varies pretty drastically in various parts of the state. And there's no doubt that in certain parts of California, our groundwater basins are depleted at very dangerous levels. And so we do need a system to properly manage and monitor what's going on with our groundwater basins and making sure that we're bringing them back to a healthy level and restoring our aquifers. The concern is the bills that were crafted last year were poorly crafted because they were rushed through the process in the last 2 weeks of session. The stakeholders weren't at the table. Ag wasn't at the table at all. It didn't even incorporate groundwater recharge, which is the #1 most important thing we can do to protect the long-term health of our groundwater basins. And that's why every Republican and every Democrat from the San Joaquin Valley voted no. We believe our voices need to be at the table and that we do need to craft groundwater policy, but we need to do it in a wise manner that recognizes the fact that our surface water and our groundwater resources are connected, that we have to think about them in connected ways. For example, south of us, they're in a 0 water allocation year for the 2nd year in a row. 0 surface water. The only water they have is groundwater. So we have to be really careful with how we address this issue, how we approach this issue. And so one of my #1 priorities this year, which is true of our whole San Joaquin Valley caucus in a bipartisan way, is to work together on cleaning up some of the unintended or intended consequences of last year's legislation. We have to figure out how to move meaningful groundwater recharge policies forward. We have to figure out how to streamline the adjudication process to figure out the water rights allocation. And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on this groundwater issue. And we need to keep all the different facets in mind as we get that done, as opposed to one-size-fits-all approaches from Sacramento that don't make sense from one region to the other.
Randy, you want to pick up the...
Can I disagree with that just for a second? As much as I love Assemblywoman Olsen, this was one of the most engaged processes I've ever seen. It went over the course of a year. People were invited. There were people who chose not to engage, who then later criticized our process. And I know they said that, so there were many people who thought that was the case, and there were meetings, but it very much was set up as something that would respect local engagement, and I do think there's going to be the need for the cleanup, but it actually was an incredibly good process. Just
Randy?
I think the legislation was necessary. We have 3 areas in the state that come to mind: northern San Luis Obispo County, the Tulare Lake Basin, and the eastern Stanislaus County region that are overdrafting groundwater to the tune of 1 million acre-feet a year. It's unsustainable. And there was no incentive for east side growers in Stanislaus County not to continue expanding by drilling wells, because drilling wells and pumping groundwater was a cheaper alternative than developing alternative surface water supplies. The Turlock and Modesto Irrigation District, over the footprint's about 250,000 acres. And over 100 years of history prove that you can conjunctively manage an area if you have a surface water supply and bank water and then draw upon it in dry years. The eastern Stanislaus County area, like it or not, are going to be faced with making the same types of investments. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a level of cooperation that's going to be necessary, but I think we're in a really good position here in this area to solve this problem. When I was on the Turlock Irrigation District Board, I think about 10 out of the 16 years that I served, we declared surplus water years, and we made water available to that east side area at $15 an acre foot, $15 an acre foot. We sold very little water, only to those that were adjacent to the main canal, because of the cost of investing in the pipelines and the pumping structures necessary to move the water further from the source, the canal. That's the future of that area. They're going to have to make investments. They can bring their groundwater into balance, but without the legislation, I think it would have continued to go unchecked. And you know, I reside on the eastern edge of the Turlock Irrigation District. My drinking water well went dry earlier this year, and it's been in place since 1975, largely due to the amount of pumping that's occurring to the east of the irrigation district.
So Randy, let me ask you, I've always been somebody involved and engaged in land use, really, for all the panelists, and there's now legislation that says if you're going to build a new subdivision, you have to identify a water source. You can't just go build a subdivision without water. And that's because Fresno had a couple of places that built subdivisions, and when they turned on the tap, there was no water down there. So we learned the hard way. But do you think that since that restriction applies to home building, it ought to also apply to new agricultural lands coming into production, that they ought to have to identify a water source before they can put in new crops or start tapping water in some way?
Well, I think with the law as it relates to groundwater now, puts that responsibility on local agencies. The groundwater sustainability agencies that the legislation calls for are in the process of being formed. They will set the groundwater sustainability plans that will determine whether or not you have to provide an offset for an additional well being drilled and so on. It's going to be more complex than that, but again, in our local area, we've got Mustang Creek, Sand Creek, Dry Creek, which has been a huge problem during high flow years that are unchecked. These are sources potentially for flood control projects that can be utilized further to the east for groundwater recharge. I think that the biggest reason I like the groundwater legislation is the power to control the local area resides with the local agency that will be formed. And the level of cooperation that's going to be necessary it will be good, and it will provide those that have resources to share with those that don't, but it will require a significant higher level of investment than we've seen.
Yeah, I was going to add that one of the important things that people don't realize yet, because there's a lot of people that still don't know and understand this law that has been passed, the most important organizing principle, whether or not you agree with all the things in the law, is the fact that everybody has to come to the table now. Everybody's in the tent, and we have to deal with this issue. So if you've been hiding out there someplace and doing what you want to do, you're no longer going to be able to hide. And I think we have to make sure that people understand that they're not going to necessarily lose anything, but they have to join and participate first. And they get that seat at the table to be able to present their case. So the law, if nothing else, it provides a new avenue to get everybody together. And then you can do triage or long-term planning. First thing we have to do is we have to get people who have lost their wells and lost their water, figure out a way to get them water. And so if we have everybody who's in the room and they can agree and figure out a way to help get that done. And I know people don't want to spend more money because they'd rather put it into their own ranch. But we're talking about long-term sustainability of the groundwater. But if everybody kicked in a buck to be able to help those people get a new well. And once again, I have to give a shout because I helped in this process with Stanislaus County. In the areas where there are no public water agencies, Stanislaus County has stepped up, as well as Merced County, and said, we're going to be the convener to get people at the table in the areas where nobody else is stepping forward. So that's going to happen. And for those of you out there who don't think this affects you, you're going to have to join something.
So Sarge, explain to me what it means.
I have to say one more comment.
I just want to ask for clarification here. When you say everybody's at the table, are you talking about the growers, the water districts? What about the neighbors who are feeling those third-party impacts? How do they have a place at the table?
They're an overlying groundwater user. They have a right to a certain amount of groundwater, and they're going to have to find somebody, or they're going to have to represent themselves. But it's both ways. You can represent yourself, but then you're also then going to be part of whatever the implementation solutions are going to be. So it just brings everybody all in one place.
Kristin?
One other comment on this, just to clarify. We absolutely have to have and had to have groundwater legislation in this state. But legislation, new laws, are not supposed to be concepts. New laws are not supposed to lay out a vision. New laws are supposed to be thoughtful, solution-focused, very specific, very workable statutes. And that's not what this was. This no doubt set out a concept, set out a vision for what's really important when it comes to groundwater. But you cannot, the bills were rewritten. Bills existed for a year, but they were completely gutted and rewritten in the final 3 weeks of session. And you cannot rewrite over 100 years of water rights law and water history in the state of California in 3 weeks. You can't do it. And so now we have laws on the books that have to be significantly cleaned up and rewritten in order to be workable. And that's not what legislation is supposed to do. So absolutely, did we need new groundwater legislation in this state? Yes. Was it done in a proper, transparent, thoughtful, solution-focused way? It wasn't. But now there's no doubt we got to figure out how to make it work. So we're running cleanup legislation through the legislature. We're hopeful it will pass. And I do agree with Sarge. Stanislaus County, Merced County have done a remarkable job taking a lead role in saying, okay, our job now is to figure this out. So let's get the stakeholders together locally and do the best job we can to put an integrated plan together that can both protect our groundwater and also recognize its importance at the same time to our overall water supply.
So this takes 2 years, 3 years minimum to get done. Are there any relief mechanisms, any regulatory mechanisms that can be used in the interim when we're already having overdraft, dry wells, those kinds of things?
Well, it actually, I think it's 2.5 years for folks to get their governance together, and then 5 or 7 years to actually get the plan together, depending on whether you're a high or medium overdraft base. And it prioritizes those that are in overdraft. What it also did is it removed some barriers and gave some tools to local government that counties in particular said they did not have to regulate pumping or to be able to do pumping fees or the different tools that folks had used. And there's nothing that stops counties and other local entities from doing things right now if they want to. That's where there are many places in California that have acted long before now, but some said they just couldn't. And so there's nothing that says you have to take that long, but I think people recognize that this is hard and does require folks talking to each other and dealing, it's neighbors dealing with a community resource, but there's nothing that says you have to go slower.
Okay, so this is really, Randy, this is for you. The governor released another new plan, a revision for the Delta very recently. And my understanding is, and the questioner says, that many of the environmental objectives were taken out of that revised plan. And now it prioritizes reliable water deliveries to the south of the state. Can you talk about that and talk about whether or not that is going to have an impact on our water and our rivers here? How does that work? I mean, when we had a water Delta plan go to the voters years ago, what was it called? I don't even remember. That went to the voters in 1982.
Oh, the peripheral
Canal. That's right.
Canal.
That's right. That became a north-south issue. So the question is this going to be another north-south issue based on the way the plan is moving? And Kristin, do you want to talk?
I haven't talked, but I'll let Randy go first.
Okay, I'm going to try and condense this just as quickly as I can. The approach that the administration has taken since Arnold Schwarzenegger was in office recognizes that the current way we convey water through the Delta is unsustainable. Got 100 or more year old levees made of peat moss that are subject to seismic and flood events that could render that area useless in terms of moving water through. The saltwater intrusion that would occur if there's a catastrophic failure would render the water supply to 25 million Californians useless for anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. The largest user of the water that's moving through the Delta is the West Side agriculture. The area that's the most dependent beyond the West Side agriculture for that water is the Tri-Valley area of San Ramon, Dublin, and Pleasanton. Southern California receives about 30% of their water supply through the Delta in a normal year, and they are not the largest user of water exported. Okay, so there was a comprehensive plan established that would include, ultimately it led to 2 tunnels that would be bored underneath the Delta. The intakes would be moved to the northern edge of the Delta instead of where they are now at the southern edge of the Delta where there's so much conflict with fish. There was 145,000 acres of habitat that was identified to be restored to enhance the fisheries as a part of this comprehensive plan. It was called the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. The habitat restoration component received lots and lots of unfavorable comments, particularly by those people that reside in the Delta. So after about 7 years of moving the environmental process and the permit process forward for the tunnels and 145,000 acres of habitat restoration, the administration stepped back last year and said, no one can afford to do this, so they have reapproached it with 2 projects now. One is called California Water Fix that consists of the tunnels and about 15,000 acres of habitat mitigation. And then California Eco Restore is targeting 30,000 acres of habitat restoration to occur over the next 5 years. That, the California Water Fix, the tunnels component, is undergoing environmental review right now. And public has an opportunity to provide input. I think there's another 50 days or so for the comment period. So that's a jet tour through the conveyance options for the Delta and where we're at today.
Environmental documents get to be 10 and 15,000 pages. It is unrealistic to assume that people can read them, understand them, and comment on them. And we have created a process that is so burdensome, it makes it really hard for these folks, and really most of us, even as well-informed as we might like to be informed participants.
Well, the good news is that the Bay Delta Conservation Plan initial environmental document was 45,000 pages. And now that they've approached it from the California Water Fix perspective, I've heard 4,000, I've heard 8,000 pages, but it's still a lot.
It's not your bedtime reading. Yeah, Kristin, you reacted to that question.
Oh, yeah.
Go for it.
So first I want to say that jet tour of the whole project was exceptionally done.
Thank you.
So that was a very, very good overview. But I do have to start where you just began, Carol, is any project that requires 40,000 pages to explain, as the original BDCP project, is preposterous. This new proposal is 8,000 pages in length. And as you heard, with no disrespect to Randy, because I think he truly is one of the dominant water experts in the state of California, and I have a lot of trust and faith in his leadership and his knowledge. But he's the chair of the Delta Stewardship Council, and he didn't even know the new proposal is 8,000 pages long. So who's reading this stuff? It's just not possible, much less commenting on it publicly. I do want to say there's a hearing in Sacramento on July 28th to discuss the new California Water Fix version of BDCP. I encourage people to attend to make their voices heard if you have an opinion on this matter, but do not be fooled by the state suggesting this is a largely different project than the original Delta Twin Tunnels project. This is still two 40-foot wide tunnels under the Delta that will cost somewhere between $17 and $67 billion, and while that's a huge variance, that's what the variance is today, without delivering any additional water. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And there is no doubt that we have to fix the Delta. We have a major problem in the Delta today. We have to fix the salinity, we have to restore the habitat for the good of the entire state's economy. But as I started my comments earlier tonight, it is unacceptable to devastate the economy of one region in order to help other regions when alternatives exist. Alternatives exist that can protect the health and the economy of the Delta, the health of the Delta economy and the Delta environment, and also meet the needs of other parts of the state. Number of different proposals that we just can't seem to advance and get studied in a thorough way. And we have to start looking at that for, again, the health of the Delta and the health of the entire state of California, because it simply does not make sense to devastate the Delta region without delivering additional water. And then to exacerbate the situation, if that's going to worsen the salinity levels in the Delta, then they have to get water to replenish that from somewhere else. And the current plan to get that water is out of the 3 river tributaries that our communities rely on. And there is a current proposal from the State Water Board that they're evaluating right now. And I do want to compliment Felicia for coming down and meeting with us on a couple of different occasions, both in Modesto and in Sacramento, to discuss our grave concerns with this proposal that could take anywhere from 35 to 60% additional water out of our river tributaries, push it into the Delta for fish and for salinity protection. Number one, even though there's not any evidence suggesting that that will help because of the predation and the other things we talked about earlier, but number two, because of this Delta Twin Tunnels project that's going to take water out of the Delta. So it's a very complicated process. That was a very simplified version of what's going on, but it's of grave concern, particularly when the theme tonight that I've tried to suggest is we have to be focused on projects that will increase supply. And the Delta Twin Tunnels project does not do that, and it does it at an extreme cost to California taxpayers.
Let me just, there's a lot in there, and different people look at it a little bit differently. And the project, the Delta Fix issue will be coming to our board it would have to ask for a water right permit change to add an additional point of diversion, because water rights are not just amount, they're time, place, and method of diversion. And so the theory is that when the fish are in the South Delta, you could take water from the larger Sacramento diversions. When the fish were there, you could take it. And the theory is then you would deal with those reverse flows at the same time that folks are concerned about salinity in the Delta. So there's a whole complex mix of things that have to be evaluated. And for us, the beauty of what we do, it'll be a full evidentiary adjudicatory hearing, and I won't be able to talk to anybody about it. And I can't talk about it at great length other than the obvious things that are out there about it. But it is very important in that proceeding. We have to make 2 determinations. One is that it won't hurt any other user of water, and that's a very important thing. And that includes this area, it includes the Sac valley, and that's usually dealt with by conditions on the water right, and also that it won't unduly hurt fish and wildlife. At the same time, our water quality standards are overdue to be updated, and while people can argue, I would say the preponderance of the science says that we need to divert more. If there were no Delta Fix project, there would still be a need to contribute to Delta outflows from the Sac Valley and all of these areas. That was on deck over 10 years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago in front of the state board, and it was resolved through a settlement where the junior water rights holders, the projects, took on that responsibility, which is why there's so much responsibility for the fish flows on the state and federal projects. And what we end up having to do in what will be many, many days of hearings, just as it was then, is really listen to everybody and then figure out how to fairly apportion it just in its own right, also looking at seniority of water rights, as we have to. So it's going to be incredibly complex, and I think there'll be all kinds of fears and concerns and finger pointing on the part of all water users towards each other, but I really think in the end, our job is going to be to figure out how to call balls and strikes as fairly as we can, and we have to do it out in public, which is a good thing.
So Felicia, does the water board have an obligation to mitigate? If in fact water flows are taken out of the tributaries or there's some other adverse effect that affects the local economies and the rivers and so on, do you have to mitigate for that the way you would for other?
Mitigation is an interesting concept. We have to take it into account. And we did. In the environmental document, we sort of got hammered both ways in terms of worst case scenarios, and it wasn't written we have to look at the impact on groundwater, we have to look at the impact on the economy. Some folks have taken, let's assume nobody pumped any groundwater, what would be the devastation, as if the water that was taken away wouldn't go. The other is if it was all groundwater, the impact on groundwater, so it was sort of worst case scenario, both scenarios, and clearly not as well explained as it might be. So essentially we have to take that into account in making the decision, which is why in our original proposal and whatever proposal we come out with early next year or late this year, we absolutely won't allocate fish flows at the level that the fish would like, to be sure, precisely because there's an impact and our job is to balance, and it's not an easy thing to do. That's why we ask people to come up with alternatives and tried to create a scenario where, and folks have been working on this, could come together with something that would actually help fish without the flow. And there's a process, again, not as well explained in the last draft and hopefully better explained and also better crafted in the next draft, where we can acknowledge all these great efforts that people are making, sort of give credit for it, and then not have to redirect as many flows. I mean, it's an interesting thing. It's basically a block of water concept, but again, quite apart from whatever the Delta project ends up being, they'll only be able to take the amount of flow in that project that's fair as amongst all of the other users. So it's going to be terribly complicated. I can't tell you how it's going to be laid out, but there will be all kinds of suggestions. And the beauty of our process in some ways is that it's not done in a room, it's out in public. And I think the last time the standards were updated, here's what happened. We do the standards, and then they're implemented as conditions on water rights permits, which is that full evidentiary adjudicatory hearing. We'll have every water rights lawyer in the Western Hemisphere in front of us, but ultimately, folks present their case in an evidentiary hearing, and frequently they settle, frankly, because people realize through the process that they can come up with a way that works for them. And we have a history of accepting those, as in the Yuba Accord, which was something that happened on the Sac Valley, where we made a proposal, came out with what we thought might work, and then environmental, urban, and water agencies came together and came up with a very innovative way that allowed them to use water for multiple benefits, so that the same drop of water that helped the fish got picked up by somebody else later. I mean, very creative, not the kind of thing we could demand that people do, but the kind of thing we could accept.
I see we need to get to the point where we invite the audience, but I had one more piece to add to this conversation about the complexity. I'm going to even make it more complex for you. One of the other pieces of my background, I did a tour of duty with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, which is the water quality portion of Felicia's organization. And I worked out of the Fresno office, and one of the things I did, I had Superfund sites. And I ended up, after I was after I left, ended up in expert testimony in a number of lawsuits, just to give you the depth of the involvement I had in water quality matters. And the reason I bring that up is because one of the important things about the proposed diversion, wherever it is or whatever facility, some type of a isolated conveyance is important, is for water quality purposes, and let me explain that. One of the things that we have going on in the San Joaquin Valley that people don't understand is that by importing water from the Delta where we are, it comes at a certain salt level. We import 7 million tons of salt into the valley every day. And so we're heading into a condition, especially in my neck of the woods and anywhere on the west side, where sooner or later we'll put ourselves out of business like we did in ancient Mesopotamia. We're bringing in too much salt and it'll salt up the ground and it won't be able to be used for agriculture anymore. So if we move the diversion point, instead of getting 500 part water in the Delta, which is kind of an average because the Delta has pulses from the tides, and that's a rough number, but it's only about 80 parts near the point of diversion that's been proposed. By moving it and changing it that much, 420 parts, we get the salt balance to zero, where we can preserve and keep operating in the San Joaquin Valley. Water quality number 2. When water goes through the Delta, and do you know how the Delta islands, in some cases, how they irrigate? They turn the pumps off because they've got water on the other side of the levee that's this high, and the water pressure will literally push into the peat soil and irrigate from the bottom. It's called sub-irrigation. They turn the pumps back on, and what happened? That soil in those areas, in many of the areas, is like tea leaves. You come out with a kind of a brown water that comes out the discharge. When that water goes to Southern California and they add chlorine to it, that tea leaf effect causes something known as disinfection byproducts. What that is you mix chlorine and bromine with organic material like comes out of tea, your tea flavor. It ends up becoming a carcinogen. So one of the most important things about the diversion point, getting into a better place for water quality, it improves both the drinking water supply for people who use it, and it slows and stops the salt accumulation in the San Joaquin Valley. So while we may not be able to get more water, it is very important that we get the best water quality that we can, whichever method we need to use to get it through the Delta.
And to further complicate it, the fear of the Delta farmers is that if you don't have to take the water, and folks who, the urban areas in the Delta, that if you don't have to take it through those pumps at the bottom, the powers that be, because there's so much economic and political power south of the Delta, that they'll become too salty for them to be able to use it. And so the trick is, how do we balance it so we all get better? And there's a governance and an operational rule and a challenging set of agreements that are going to have to take place, because right now everybody's worried, as humans do, everybody's worried that they're going to get taken advantage of, they're going to be the chump, and they're going to be left behind. And so it's more than just a plumbing issue. It's the architecture of the agreements, much of which will come at the board, and this is an open invitation for people who want to become leaders in coming up with that set of agreements and ideas, because this one is a very, very challenging, I don't know if it's a Gordian knot, but someone can also come up with the best metaphor for what it is. It's doable, but it's something that actually requires people to honor the really legitimate interests of everyone. The interests of folks in the Central Valley who are farming, who need clean enough water, the folks, over half of the population of California that relies on it, in urban Southern California for 30% of their water, increasingly less as they develop their stormwater capture, recycling, and other supplies, which they're doing very, very quickly, and those farmers in the Delta, and everyone who is a tributary to the Delta. It's unless we can all find a space where we can all, I don't want to say get better together, but all see the collective benefit as Californians, it's not going to come together. I'm optimistic it will, because when the chips are down, people step up, but it is in no way simple in any way, shape, or form.
So we're only going to have time for maybe 2 more questions. I'm going to give you one that's the straightforward one is, let's talk a little bit about desal. Is it appropriate? Where is it appropriate? What's the future? Who wants to talk a little bit about that? Sarge, go for it.
I got a deal for you. The technology is moving very, very quickly, really fast. I just left a meeting late yesterday where new technology came in the door, where this company is talking about engineering plastics, proteins, and custom building a new filter. Instead of pushing water through a membrane in what they call reverse osmosis, they're going to be able to customize a membrane and use 10% of the energy of a reverse osmosis membrane. So technology we're on the dawn of a whole new era in terms of technology. So desal is going to become a lot more practical in some spaces. But we told these people, and it's the problem we have every time, is that if you're inland, what are you going to do with the waste? We have a very rigorous regulatory system here in California that says if you create a hazardous waste, you have to spend the money to dispose of it as a hazardous waste. And frankly, some of the waters that we have to treat to try and desal it can create fairly strong waste. So they come in with the ideas, and I'm very optimistic. I mentioned it early on, that I think the technology is going to come through, but they have to come with the whole package. They have to come in and deal with the waste disposal. They have to deal with maybe pre-treatment. So one piece doesn't work. It has to be the whole package. And we say that over and over and over to everybody that comes through us. Fresno State has a little program down there where we encourage technology. We have an incubator to help develop some of these companies. So if they've got a good idea and we run it through our technical analysis, we'll say, yeah, we'll help you out and get you going. And we've done it in irrigation, and now we're starting to see it much more in the industrial side. So yes, we're going to get better at desal, but people have to think bigger than just one part. Everybody's got a great idea, right? But they don't have the whole picture.
That's a good way to put it. Desal absolutely is a part of our water future. There's no question about it. I think when I talked about the Water Action Plan, I mentioned appropriate circumstance. There are places on the Central Coast, for example, where they don't have that many other options. San Diego is investing a tremendous amount in doing the largest coastal desal facility in the country, and that's going to account for 7% of their water supply. And they're doing it for a very good reason, which is that they're at the end of a bunch of pipes. They're like the most junior at the end of a bunch of pipes, and they don't have a groundwater basin to speak of that they can use to store recycled water or capture stormwater. And so they have to go to an expensive addition to their portfolio, and they're going to prove out a lot of things that I think are going to be helpful to others. In general, as other communities are looking at it, it's more energy intensive at the moment because of reverse osmosis, and it has some significant environmental impacts, both from the intake and the discharge, and we just set this level playing field standard as opposed to having each desal facility along the coast have to fight with a different regional board. We did a general order, and so the rules are clear. The industry was involved, the environmental community was involved, but also from a competitive level, it's out there. But many communities are turning first to conservation, recycled water, and stormwater capture because they're cheaper and they're there. But that doesn't mean that people are going to be writing that off. I think those are essential in urban California to buy the time we need for the technological and economic breakthroughs that will make it less expensive. I mean, frequently wherever I go in the state, folks point to what somebody else ought to do, whether it's urban folks not realizing that they're consuming a lot of more of their water through the food they eat, or I like to say that someone in LA has more in common with the Central Valley farmer that grows their food than with the jerk down the block that's overwatering their lawn. They just don't realize it, unfortunately. But there's also folks who will say, well, why don't you just make all of urban California go desal? And I would say it's easy to say they have water rights too. It's easy to say they should buy the most expensive water. But the fact is that eventually we will need to go there, but we need to do whatever the lowest cost alternatives are first, and that's what people are focused on.
I'll add a couple things on desal. Sarge is absolutely right. The technology is improving rapidly, which is going to lower the cost. The other potential technology development other than what he described with the plastics, is there's a lot of experimentation going on now with solar and whether we could capture the solar energy and store it. And then if we can find an effective way to store solar energy and transmit it to desalination plants, that will dramatically lower the energy use and the electricity costs as well. And those things are moving forward, which provides great momentum and opportunities for desal. And if that continues along the trend lines with these advancements in technology, the other piece we're going to have to address, once again, it's a common thread with all of these projects, is duplicative bureaucracy. On Tuesday, next Tuesday, I will be at the Carlsbad plant that Felicia just referred to. As she stated, this is going to be the largest desalination plant in the country. It's scheduled to come online perhaps as early as November, as late as January. And they started working on it nearly 20 years ago. But the great news is it's coming online and it will supply 7% or more of the city of San Diego's water supply. Here's the troublesome part. The exact same company is seeking to build the exact same size and scope desal plant just a little further north in Huntington Beach. It's the exact same plant. Same design, same scope, same size, same company, same investors. They're already 7 years into the process. We have to find a way to streamline this process, and the Coastal Commission is a huge roadblock to be able to move these forward. But I do agree with both my fellow panelists that momentum is growing for desalination plants, cost is being reduced, and I think it's got to be a huge part of California's water portfolio in the future.
Okay, one word or two word answer quickly. What is your recommendation? I'll start with Kristin because it's been your theme tonight. What's your recommendation that for something that can be done to start immediate action?
Expedite the construction of projects that will increase supply. Desalination, recycling projects, stormwater capture, and storage.
Okay, anybody else have a pet they'd like to put on the table?
All of the above.
Okay. Okay. All right, so no priorities in terms of small storage, moving on the sustainability things, just, I mean, part of the problem is that we've had a very round discussion tonight with lots of issues and lots of ideas. And so when you try to focus and you walk out of here and say, okay, what is it that needs to be done? It's very hard because there's 50 things that could be done.
Well, we need to do them all. I mean, I really do mean we have to do them all. If you look at what we've done and pushed, I mean, we're going on all cylinders on everything on that list, which I've never seen before. And it's not just the administration, it's folks working with us. What it takes is project proponents for all of these things. We're open to it, but it really requires, if you look at even storage, Los Vaqueros, I worked on this stuff in the 90s when we were looking at some of the same projects. And Los Vaqueros got it together, got their documents together, said they'd pay for their share of it, and they raised it. They'll probably come in and get theirs done fast too, and our permitting process only took 6 months on that. So if people get their permits together and look at what the requirements are, as opposed to not dealing with what the requirements are, get it together, say they'll pay their fair share, it'd be great. One of the challenges in storage, and I sympathize with the frustration of how long it takes, is even in the bond language, the Water Commission can't put out the guidelines to say what the public share will pay for until the end of next year. It was just sort of time that made sense in '09. I remember working on the '09 package, and then it just got added in order to get that bond through. But what people should be doing is working on their projects, I believe in shorter environmental documents being better than longer ones. When I ran a public works department, one of the first things I did is we fired all of our CEQA consultants because there are people who just generate a lot of words. The best documents are short, clear, and tell the public what the project is, and then you hold a hearing and you listen to people and you change the project if they have good ideas. And I had projects that we got through in record time where people thanked us at the end. It was amazing. But it was because we really focused on what the intent of the statute is. And so I think folks that are proposing these projects need to pull them together, say they'll pay their share, and be ready to go when the guidelines come out, because you're in an administration that wants to say yes to everything right now.
I would say to local inventory, figure out what you have and what you could possibly use, and local solutions and build a priority list of which ones might fit with the local inventory. And then what Felicia's saying, and then promote those projects, get those projects into a condition where they can plug and play in whatever comes down the pipe. Because I think more money will come down the pipe. I think we're going to have to put more bond money into play. And I think people are going to have to pay more for water. I'm sorry, but that's what's going to happen. Water has been taken for granted for too long.
Kristin, is there a role for the legislature in this?
There needs to be an increasing role for the legislature. I mean, whether it's water or a myriad of other subject matters, we've had a history for too long now of turning too much of the decision-making authority over to the executive branch and state departments and agencies. And there is a growing interest, I think a growing bipartisan interest, in taking some of the oversight responsibility back to make sure we actually get stuff done. And that's the role that the legislature can play.
Okay.
But on the local level, I would go back to my initial comments that the fact of the matter is the Valley is underrepresented and it has a very difficult time, and Kristin, yes, has addressed some bipartisan things, but the fact of the matter is we don't have the political and the political might that we need to have at the legislative process. The votes are not in the Valley, so we are in some respects a second cousin that gets not the treatment. So politically we have to be active, and we also have to look at the economic impacts of the cost of all these things. Yes, water's going to cost more. Electricity is going to cost more. All these things are going to come out of our pocketbooks. So that's a factor that should not be ignored in the impact.
Randy, you get the benediction here.
Well, specifically about water, most of the action for the last few decades has been at the regional level. There hasn't been much activity from the federal or the state government. And I think a forum like this is perfect because you provide an opportunity to educate citizens and provide them an opportunity to engage at the local level. That's where the action's going to be at. That's where the solutions are going to be found. And that's what our future rests on. So thank you again to the Modesto Bee, the City of Modesto, and everyone that's participated tonight. And I hope that you all go home better informed than you did when you came.
So before I turn it back over to the folks from the Bee, I want to thank our panelists for an enormously informative, engaged, and engaging discussion. And as I said, we could have picked it up and gone in 15 different directions. But thank you so much.